I opened my eyes slowly, my eyelids feeling as heavy as lead. The first thing I saw was the filthy ground just a few centimeters from my face. The concrete floor was damp and dirty, covered in a thin layer of mud and mold. The stench exuding from the place was nauseating. My stomach lurched immediately, while my eyes involuntarily watered, irritated by the fetid air. All this while I heard the incessant sound of dripping water coming from the kitchen. The door was open, allowing the sound to propagate into the room where I was chained. Each drip echoed in my ears like a clock ticking away the time. It was disturbing. How long had I been in that place? A week? A month? It was hard to say. Every moment dragged on like an eternity in that filthy, oppressive environment. Time seemed to have no meaning there. I knew that no matter how many days or weeks passed, I wouldn't get out of there so easily. A muffled sound reached my ears from far away. It was him. That man was coming back. As he came closer, I heard that sound, the metallic, rumbling sound of the rusty barrel of his rifle scratching the dirt floor. He hummed a melody laden with macabre pleasure, the same as always when he brought in a new game. His deep murmur oozed sadistic pleasure that disgusted me. His heavy footsteps made the wooden balcony shake and creak as he leisurely climbed the steps. The door opened slowly for me to see my suffering. The man who entered was huge, with hands and feet as big as sticks. He had a big belly, and his hairy chest resembled a grizzly bear. He walked calmly into the kitchen, still humming that disturbing tune. In his giant hands, I saw the limp, lifeless body of a rabbit swinging like the pendulum of a clock. I was able to hear a loud plunk as he placed the bunny on a wooden board somewhere in the room. He stepped through the doorway. It was only at that moment that I became aware of how hungry I was. There was no way I could recall the last time I had eaten. As soon as the man emerged from the building, I uttered a hushed murmur. I beg you, please serve me something to eat." The man looked at me and then smiled menacingly. After a low chuckle, there was complete silence for a moment. To put that into perspective, you haven't even begun to perform for me today. This meant that I would not be getting fed for a considerable amount of time. In addition to being painful, the blisters that appeared on my hands and feet appeared to be infected. I would probably be able to break them and get away if the chain weren't as strong as it is. After returning to the kitchen, I heard the man open and close the refrigerator. He then went back to the kitchen. He exited the room while carrying a cool drink and made his way carefully towards the couch that was located in the room that was directly opposite from me. He then proceeded to switch on the television while he was sitting on his couch and heaving a deep, long sigh. It seemed like hours had passed while I was sitting there by myself in the dark, and hunger was driving me completely nuts. There were numerous attempts that I made to free my feet from the chains. Nevertheless, I was unable to do so because the chains were too tight around my ankles, which were made of bone. As I doze off, I find myself wishing that this whole thing might be over. After some time has passed, I hear him stomping up a staircase, and it seems as though he is possibly pulling something behind him. I heard the sound of something locking, which is a sound that I am familiar with. He closed a door. His expression is one of complete and utter insanity as he makes his way closer to me. In addition to being covered in blood from head to toe, he was holding what appeared to be a kitchen knife of some kind during the incident. When he returns to the kitchen, he places his weapon in the sink and walks back into the room. Despite the fact that blood is still streaming from his beard, the man returns to the scene and walks over to me while brandishing a whip. While he is leaning over, I am able to detect the aroma of alcohol on his breath. "You want to be fed, don't you?" After I give him a slight nod, he begins to unravel his whip. "It is going to be necessary for you to put in some effort." He said this in a tone that left me feeling really uneasy, and I could tell that whatever was going to happen, it was not going to be a pleasant experience. "Dance for me?" he added. But all I could do was display perplexity in my expression, because I had no understanding of what he meant by that. "It's time to dance for me." At the very top of his lungs, he uttered this. I rose up and began moving my body, but I wouldn't call it dancing. I was just moving around. While leaning back and holding the whip in one hand, the man gave the impression that he was getting ready to strike. A swift motion was all it took for him to deliver a powerful whip to my feet, which landed on the top of my right foot. After falling to the ground, I immediately began crying. It was his instruction that I stand up and proceed, and I did everything in my power to comply with his directives. After that, he began to whip my feet once more until I started dancing as quickly as I could. After approximately 5 minutes of this, I finally gave in to tiredness and collapsed. After giving one more giggle, the man strolled back into the kitchen with a broad smile on his face. He had just finished his sentence. After seizing the dead rabbit, he took it back. He encircled the rabbit with his enormous hands, placing one hand on the animal's head and the other hand just below the neck. The air around me was filled with the dreadful sound of bones shattering and flesh ripping as he pushed till it pierced the air. The right hand of the man was holding the head of the rabbit, which had been detached from the body of the animal, as if he were palming a basketball from his hand. He then added, "Eat up," as he placed the head of the rabbit on the ground in front of me after dropping it. He then strolled back into the room with the television in his possession while laughing his cackling laugh. I was paralyzed with fear at this point in time. Not only was the hunger so intense, but the sight of the rabbit that had been severed from its head almost caused me to lose my appetite. Not quite. The following action that I took was inexcusable, and the mere thought of it causes me to grit my teeth. After I had completed everything, I curled up into a ball on the floor and allowed myself to cry myself to sleep. I continued to hear the man laughing throughout the night while he consumed what appeared to be decaying flesh. And once again, I fell into a deep sleep. Tired and afraid of getting used to the situation, once again, the scene repeated itself. I opened my eyes, looking at the filthy floor, not knowing if it was day or night. The man went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out another beer. I already knew his movements just from the sounds. He started humming that song and came towards me, but he started dancing. He was definitely very drunk, as he had fallen over 3 or 4 times. And on one of those occasions, when he was on the floor, his bunch of keys had come loose from his pants and slid down the wall, at a distance between him and me. I saw at that moment a thread of hope, a possible escape from that scummy place. As he tried to get up from the floor, the man staggered from side to side, very dizzy, and unsuccessfully fell to his stomach. I called out to him in a low tone, gradually increasing it until I was practically shouting at him to no response. I stretched out my arms as far as I could to reach the bunch of keys, but it was too far away. So I stretched out my legs with the same desperate intention of escape and the pain of my wounds as they came into direct contact with that dirty floor and water. After a few minutes, I finally reached the keys and freed myself from the chains, while at the same time looking for something to protect me in case that beast woke up. Otherwise, I wouldn't stand a chance. To my dismay, he was regaining consciousness and I hadn't found anything yet. So I decided to step over him before it was too late, and when I put my foot in the kitchen, the man grabbed my other leg, causing me to fall over a chair, which I used to get away from him. I managed to get up and grab a knife that was on the table. He got up angrily and tried to grab me from behind, at which point I turned around and stabbed him in his huge belly, while screaming for relief from all the pain and humiliation that being had caused me. I spun the knife inside his belly, and in response, he punched me in the head, leaving me dizzy and bewildered, just like him with the loss of blood. I crawled out of the property, not knowing where to go, but looking for help as I tried to stay awake. But it was too late for me. My feet had infected wounds, I was burning up with fever, and my head was throbbing incessantly. With no strength left, I stopped moving, but I could still hear the sound of the water dripping in the sink echoing in my mind. I began to close my eyes, knowing that I would never wake up. If you want more disturbing stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.